Hello, U.S. History students, and welcome to Unit 5, Lesson 3, Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal. From 1929 to 32, President Hoover had been criticized in the newspapers, in the media, and by the people because they felt like he was not doing enough for them. He wasn't helping to end the Depression. Within that time period, tens of thousands of businesses failed. Unemployment goes to an all-time high of 25% of the population. The entire American banking system virtually collapses. And Hoover, that whole time, is sitting there thinking and telling people that Americans need to rely on rugged individualism, which means basically the idea that if you work hard and you push through the bad times, eventually things are going to get better. But he was a very laissez-faire president, a very lazy government president who believed that the government did not need to intervene in this situation, that the American people needed to handle it on their own. But as it gets closer and closer to 1932, we're getting closer to an election year, and he wants to be reelected. He begins to offer some relief checks, basically paying American citizens to try to stimulate the economy. He starts to offer a few job programs. As we talked about in the last unit, he creates a government agency that's going to help issue loans to businesses to try to prevent business failures. But at that point, by the 1932 election, most American citizens see this as too little too late. He has not done enough. He's running for re-election. Hoover wants to be re-elected. But Americans want hope. They want strong leadership. They want somebody that's going to actually help them. Democratic candidate Franklin Delano Roosevelt is that person. He's the person who they see is going to help them. And as you can see by our election map here, the election of 1932, Hoover only wins 6 states versus the rest of the continental 48 that Franklin Roosevelt wins. Roosevelt wins the 1932 election by an overwhelming 89% electoral college vote and becomes the new president. In his first inauguration speech, he says these words: "Let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance." This is one of Roosevelt's most famous speeches. And that quote, "the only thing we have to is fear itself," is invigorating to the American people. When he's inaugurated, unemployment's at an all-time high. 25% of the population is without a job. So this quote, this speech, really inspires hope in the American people that they did pick the right person. Instead of picking Hoover again, they picked the president that will get us out of this. When he becomes president, his first act is a promise to the American people. We are going to fight this depression, and the government is going to help. He believed that the government should use that deficit spending that causes additional debt, as a means of stimulating the economy. He knows that the economy's gotta pick up somehow, and the only way to do that is for people to start buying things again. Because as we saw in previous lessons, it's the trickle-down effect of overproduction and people not buying stuff that's going to end up causing more harm. It's what's going to cause the businesses to fail. It's what's going to cause people to lose their jobs. And in this case, Roosevelt really sees that the only way to fix it is to spend even though you don't really have the money. Every president is judged based on what they do in their first 100 days in office. In Roosevelt's first 100 days, he convinces Congress to pass a broad platform of legislation. And these are different programs and different acts and different things that he calls the New Deal. And his plan is to attack the Depression. Let's figure it out. Let's attack it. And if the government steps in and the government helps out, maybe we can end this thing before it continues for too long. This is his thought process anyway. So he's inaugurated in 1933, and within the first 100 days that he is the American president, he begins this New Deal so that people can see that he's very serious about the government getting involved and the government helping out. His first action is to address the bank crisis. Under the Hoover administration, banks fail all over the country, partially because of the speculation in the stock market and things like that, but also people simply don't have money to put in the banks, and even if they did, they would not trust the banks to be able to do that. Many people who are from this era, into their later years of life, 40, 50, 60, sometimes years later, they did not trust banks. My great-grandmother, for example, into her 90s, would keep her money in an envelope in the bottom drawer of her chest of drawers because she did not trust putting it in the bank. Many, many people felt the same way that she did because of what they had experienced. The runs on the banks, the people trying to get their money out of the bank when the bank didn't have it. Bank lost all of it. So by 1933, 25,000 banks across the country were closed. They had failed. So FDR, in a means of trying to fix this problem, declares a bank holiday. All banks across the country will be closed for 4 days. And in that 4 days, the government's going to send inspectors and federal regulators to go in there, audit that bank, and determine whether the bank is healthy and okay to continue business, or whether they're really doing really poorly and they need to be shut down. After that 4 days, only the banks that were deemed healthy were allowed to reopen. So this was FDR's way of going through on a national scale and looking at, are these banks really okay? Can we trust these banks with our citizens' money? And only the ones that those regulators deemed okay were allowed to open. After that bank holiday, few U.S. banks failed anymore. As you can see in our chart here, in 1933, we had 4,000 approximate bank failures. But that number drops down to far below even 500 for the remainder of that chart, even getting down to what appears to be 0 after 1948. Slowly, as Americans start to see that these banks are doing well and things are okay, some Americans begin to regain their confidence. They start investing back in the banks. They start taking loans again from the banks and start doing business again. Now, that's not to say everybody, but a large number of Americans do start to slowly regain confidence in the banking system. FDR wants to make sure that the citizens know that he really does care and that he's doing everything he possibly can to help them out. And he's going to use the power of the radio, this great 1920s invention that has really begun to unify the nation, to communicate with the citizens. And he's going to go on the radio and he's going to tell them exactly what's going on. What steps are the government taking to really get to the bottom of the issues that are the problems of the Depression, so that we can get out of it and move on. And he calls these the fireside chats. And he's not using fancy legal language or complicated ways of explaining it. He is just talking to them like they are regular people, clear language, and just letting them know this is the programs we're implementing, this is what they do, this is how they're going to, we hope that they're going to help. And these weekly radio addresses, once a week, you can turn your radio on it and you can hear the president addressing you as a nation and just giving you point blank, easy to understand explanations of exactly how the government's helping you. This really starts to give people more confidence. No longer do they have a president who's just saying, do it yourself. This president is invested, and he's showing them he's invested by every week, like clockwork, coming on the radio and explaining to them that he's there and he's helping and this is what he's doing. Not only President Roosevelt does this and really goes out and sees the people and helps them and lets them know that they're there, but his first lady, his wife, Eleanor, really sees what's happening in the country, and she serves as his legs and eyes because she actually tours the nation. An important thing to understand about FDR is he was disabled. Franklin Roosevelt contracted polio, and what polio is a virus that causes paralysis. That means you're paralyzed, you can't move. And now it's very easily prevented. You get a shot for it, and your vaccine takes care of you. Back then they didn't have that though. And it was a very, very scary disease that FDR actually contracts as an adult. Prior to his contraction of polio, he was a treasure hunter and an adventurer. And by the time he's elected president in 1932, he's pretty much bound to a wheelchair. But he doesn't want people to know that. He thinks that if the American people know that he's in a wheelchair, that's going to make him seem weak. And that's absolutely what he does not want, because he feels like in a time like that, the president must be a strong person. And he can't let them think he's weak. And actually back then, the media was very good about concealing his illness. But because of this, Eleanor becomes his legs and eyes and ears, and she's traveling the nation and reporting back to him what she's seeing and how she feels. She becomes very conscious of the New Deal, and through her travels, can tell the president exactly what these people are going through so that he knows how he needs to act, what he needs to put in place. She would go and give lectures. She would talk on the radio. She had a daily newspaper column that you can still find. It's been digitalized and it's online. And she was one of the first ladies to really speak out about African American rights. She was very much a civil rights advocate. The first New Deal focuses on 3 R's. And I say the first New Deal because there's 2 different sections. Both focus on the 3 R's, but the R's are somewhat different, and we'll look at that momentarily. The first R is relief. This is immediate. Immediate action taken by the government to help the people in the form of relief checks and job programs that are going to put a little bit of money in people's pockets as a means of stimulating the economy. Because if they've got some money in their pocket, they're going to go out and spend that money, and that's going to help other industries start to revitalize. And these job programs are going to allow for people to have a job, get a paycheck, and start to get out of the situation. The second R is recovery. And these are programs that are going to stimulate agriculture. We're not going to overproduce like we used to, but allow for farmers to start to get back on their feet. Allow for industry to revitalize. And all of that, in turn, will help the economy recover. And then reform our permanent programs put into place to try to prevent this from happening again. To correct the problems that caused it, so that we don't ever have to have another depression to this extent. Not to say we're not going to have economic downturn in the future, but in this case, we never want to see this situation occur. So they're going to implement programs to correct the issues and to prevent further issues to the level that we see in the Great Depression. The relief checks go out to about 15% of Americans, and it's based on allowing people who had no money to be able to try to start purchasing items again as a means of stimulating industry. As you can see on our chart, not every state had the same amount of people. Texas, for example, had below 8% of families receiving relief checks. Most of the southern states on the East Coast have above 15%. The greatest success of the New Deal was its ability to offer these relief programs, not only with the unemployment checks, but also with the following job programs. One of the first job programs that's created is the Civilian Conservation Corps, or the CCC. All of these programs have 3-letter acronyms. And this CCC is a program to allow jobs for young men. The CCC only allows jobs for men ages 18 to 25. And the purpose of this, or the thought process, is we'll give them jobs, they'll then send the money home to their families, and their families will then use that money to purchase goods. Not only are these programs allowing for people to have money in their pocket again, but they're providing for new infrastructure, or updated and better infrastructure. Infrastructure being roads and things like that. So the CCC builds roads, parks, tries to prevent soil erosion near waterways. But the biggest thing is it offers jobs for 3 million men, ages 18 to 25. And again, those men are sending their checks back home. The people at home are then using those checks to purchase goods, thus stimulating the economy. The government also helped relieve unemployment by creating the Public Works Administration, or the PWA. This hires 2 million people to build airports and dams and hospitals. And the difference really between the PWA and the CCC is the PWA is not restricted to an age limit. So men of older ages are allowed to get jobs in these programs as well. And again, it's helping to build up America's infrastructure, because now we've got these new airports, dams for hydroelectricity, hospitals for better health care, schools for better education for the future. And all of these things are not only allowing for better jobs and people to have jobs again in general, but helping the American people as well. A few things that are occurring with the third R are long-term reforms that are going to help fix the problems that caused the Depression in the first place. Because the goal is to have this situation, to this extent, never happen again. So the SEC, or the Securities and Exchange Commission, is created to regulate the stock market as a means of preventing another crash. Because while the stock market crash itself is not necessarily a cause, it was the spark. But this helps to prevent the overspeculation that we saw in the 1920s, and the SEC is still around today. Again, the New Deal creates long-term reforms, long-term changes, and fixes to those problems to address those causes to prevent them from happening again. The next program that's very important is the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, or the FDIC. This is created to prevent bank issues. So we fixed the stock market problem. Now let's focus on the bank problem. And the FDIC was created as a means of guaranteeing bank accounts. So it's an insurance policy, essentially, for the money that you have in the bank. This program is also still around. If you have a bank and you do not see an FDIC insured sticker in the window, you need to go to another bank. Because the FDIC insures the money in your bank account up to $250,000. So if that bank happens to fail or something happens to it, the government will make sure that you still have your money, instead of you going to the bank and all of a sudden all your money's gone, like so many did in 1929. The next one is the Tennessee Valley Authority. The purpose of this one was to not only create jobs, but also to bring electricity to the South, where electricity was not necessarily as common as it is today. So what they do is they build hydroelectric power plants in 7 southern states, where they will build the dam on the river, and as the river goes through, it churns up electricity. This is going to offer electricity to many southern areas that are considered rural or in the country that did not previously have reliable electricity. The Agricultural Adjustment Act was created to help farmers and stimulate agriculture. But in a twist to how the government helped stimulate agriculture during World War I, this time, instead of paying them to produce, the government's paying them not to produce. The hope with this is that if the farmers are not producing the crops, prices will eventually go up. Because if you're reducing supply, eventually it's going to even out and crop prices are going to go back up. And this is how the farmers are going to be able to start making money again. This does help farmers, but unfortunately in this situation it never made enough money to stimulate the economy. The National Recovery Administration, or the NRA, was created to also stimulate industry. So this is an organization that tries to set fair wages and working hours for workers, as well as minimum prices for product. So in order to help businesses recover, instead of the businesses being able to set whatever price they want, or have to in some cases, the government is going to say, you cannot sell this can of beans for less than 15 cents. This is going to allow people to be, or the businesses rather, to be able to start making a little bit more money. However, the NRA does fail to create fair competition because while they set minimum prices, they're not setting maximum prices. And I believe that's some issues that we see. That's issues we see even today. It doesn't really stimulate industry, and it does not lead to the end of the Great Depression. But it does help, again, provide hope. While some of these programs are really, really good, and they help the people, they help the economy, they lower unemployment, they restore hope. But by 35, we're still in the Depression. And a lot of people start to wonder, are we really doing everything we can? So by 1935, FDR's failure to end the Depression really starts to lead to some criticism. People start criticizing the fact that you said this was going to be ending. You said these programs were going to help, and we're still in the Depression. The most vocal of these critics was Louisiana Senator Huey Long. Huey Long has his own plan. He decides that he's going to title his plan the Share the Wealth Plan. And he proposes taxing all personal income over $1 million. And from that money, giving each U.S. family $2,500 per year. Sounds like a fairly good idea. His idea is based on closing the wealth gap. So if you've still got people that are making over $1 million a year, why not tax them more? And the higher their income is, the higher the tax revenue is going to be. And he thinks that that's just going to allow us to pay all of the rest of the families in the country $2,500 a year. And in theory, it does sound like a really good plan. To the point where Huey Long threatens to run as a third-party candidate. He says in 1936, I'm going to run for president. But there's a lot of people that don't really like him. And he gets assassinated. But here's a quote from one of his speeches. But when they've got everything on God's love and earth that they can eat, and they can wear, and they can live in, and that all their children can, then we've got to call Mr. Morgan, Mr. Mellon, and Mr. Rockefeller back and say, come back here. Put that stuff back on this table here where you took it away from, here and that you don't need. Leave something else for the American people to consume. This was a rallying cry for people because he's saying, hey, J.P. Morgan, hey, John D. Rockefeller, or the families of at this point, y'all got all this money, come back here and give something back to the people. But people don't end up liking him too much, and he's assassinated in 1935. This brings us to the end of Unit 5, Lesson 3, Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal. See you back here for Unit 5, Lesson 4, and I hope you have a great day.